Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, transforming the way people think and work so their organizations can thrive. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ed Kless, and today's episode is cut from another podcast of which I am the co-host, The Soul of Enterprise, which is also sponsored by Sage. The Soul of Enterprise is dedicated to belief that business has a spiritual, though not necessarily religious, component. I hope you enjoy this excerpt. If you do, please visit www.thesoulofenterprise.com for more.
We absolutely should be thankful for textiles, and I actually wrote a piece in for Thanksgiving for USA Today about it, which people can find on my website, vpostrel.com. Textiles are everywhere. Arthur C. Clarke had this famous Clarke's third law, which says that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But it's also, the converse is also true, which is that any sufficiently familiar technology is indistinguishable from nature. That is, we tend to take it for granted. And cloth is definitely one of those technologies. Textiles are everywhere. Obviously, they're in our clothes, they're in our blankets and sheets and sofa cushions, but they're also in things that we don't necessarily think about. Sneakers, for example, or backpacks, or tents, or parachutes, or curtains, they're bandages, they're just everywhere. And that was even more true in the past than it is today. So, for example, in the age of sail, textiles were absolutely critical to traveling long distances. So textiles are everywhere. They're a very old, one of humanity's oldest technologies, and a very advanced technology, and one that most of us have the luxury of never thinking about how much ingenuity and innovation and just sheer brain power goes into every piece of cloth.
And later in the book, you have one of my favorite quotes, which is, "We suffer textile amnesia because we enjoy textile abundance."
Exactly. And that's very much, I guess, one of the major themes of the book, which is to take that textile amnesia and cure it. Give us some idea of what went into getting us to this amazing textile abundance that we enjoy today. And along the way, it becomes this history of science and technology and history of the world, and you learn a lot about a lot of things.
Yes, we're definitely going to get into all that. It really starts with thread, doesn't it? That's kind of the basis for that. So talk a little bit about the origins of thread. Yeah,
so thread is truly ancient. And in fact, between the time that I submitted my manuscript in late 2018 and the time I revised it in early 2019, work was published, academic work, that found that Neanderthals had made string, which is distinguishable from thread, I'll explain that in a minute, 50,000 years ago. And by making string, I mean something more than just like ripping some things off of vines. You have to take fibers, in this case plant fibers, and twist them together. And then in this case, they were also plied, which means you take two of those or more of those twisted strands, and you then twist them together to make them stronger. If you think about a rope, you can picture that. And this goes back 50,000 years. And it's one of the most important breakthroughs ever, because once you have string, you can do all kinds of things. You can attach an arrowhead to an arrow shaft. You can make a fishing net. You can hang your food above the ground. You can make traps. You can make fishing lines. You can make carriers for your babies or others for the food that you gather, all these kinds of things. So going back to literally cave dwellers, people made string. Now, thread, or yarn as it's sometimes called, is slightly different, which is that it implies that you're actually not just using string, but you're making it into something. You're weaving textiles, or you're weaving comes out about maybe 10,000 years ago. So there's a big period in between. And one of the big factors is you have the development of agriculture. So you can get a lot of fiber to make thread out of.
And it's so interesting. Like, you wonder what possessed somebody to say, if I do this, I'm going to get this long piece of whatever, right? I mean, where do we even start with that? That's the thing that amazes me.
It is fascinating because all around the world, using very similar devices, people figured out how to make thread. And making thread means you got to take something that's short. It could be as long as a shaft of flax inside the flax, which would be maybe a couple of feet, which would give you linen, which you would use to make linen thread. You've got to take that short thing and make it long and strong. And to do that means you have to twist a bunch of these short things together, and you have to continually do that and then, wrap it up somehow so that later you can do something with it. And people all around the world figured out how to do this using something that's called a drop spindle, which is a very simple device. It's essentially a stick with a weight at one end, sort of not at the very end, but near the end. And the weight helps you maintain angular momentum when you spin it essentially like a top, and you use that to twist your thread and to collect your thread. And it is a very simple, very common, and very laborious in the sense of time process. Up until the Industrial Revolution, most women around the world spent a lot of their time spinning thread, either for their personal use, household use, or in some cases for taxes, and in some cases for the marketplace. But you need a lot of thread to make anything. If you take, and by thread, I'm talking about what you're weaving from. I'm not talking about the sewing thread, which is a whole other thing. So take the denim in a typical pair of blue jeans. To weave that much denim, which is just, one pair of pants, requires 6 miles of thread. Yeah, I mean, the math gets big really fast. And so 6 miles of thread takes a long time to spin. I mean, if you're in the fastest pre-industrial revolution kind of spinning, which was with the Indian charka, which is a step up from, it's significantly faster than the kind of drop spindle I was talking about. With that technology, it would take 100 hours to spin enough thread to weave enough denim for a pair of jeans. So you can see why cloth would be scarce, why spinners would make very little money despite the incredible importance of their work to the process, because it took so long to make anything. In the 18th century, it was not uncommon in England for weavers to be sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the supplies of yarn to come in, because even with 20 people spinning for every weaver, there was often a shortage.
Review and subscribe by searching your podcast player of choice for Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.